morning and welcome to our latest virtual roundtable brought to you by Development Finance Today and kindly sponsored by Sillence Hurn. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Beth Fisher. I'm the editor at MediaNet, the publisher of online titles Bridging and Commercial and Development Finance Today, and also the print bi-monthly Bridging and Commercial magazine. Today, we will be discussing the challenges around modular construction and how to finance schemes that involve it. Modern methods of construction, or MMC, while not new, has been growing in popularity globally in recent years among developers and consumers alike, and the government has also emphasised its importance. In July 2019, a report by the House of Commons Select Committee recognised that a significant proportion of homes must be built using MMC if we are to meet the target to deliver 300,000 homes annually. Homes England recently unveiled its latest research project, which aims to bridge the gap in understanding the benefits of MMC by collecting data over several years across multiple sites, many of which are using modular and panelised construction technologies. MMC has the potential to be significantly more productive than traditional building methods, something which is much needed during a time of severe supply chain challenges, material shortages, an ageing workforce, and a lack of new entrants. This has translated into painfully high levels of material cost inflation, and while MMC projects often appear to be expensive in comparison to traditional builds, I am interested to hear from our panel today about whether this is still true. New technologies allow homes to be built more quickly, with fewer workers on site and less affected by British weather. It also can improve the quality, consistency and energy efficiency of homes, something our housing minister has pledged is at the heart of this government's mission to support people in this country. How quickly we can increase the industry's labour force with a different set of tools than those used on traditional sites is another matter, however. While the benefits are clear, lender appetite towards this type of construction is still rather limited, with the main hurdle around loan security and collateral warranties. There are also other constraints that need addressing, such as regulatory and approval barriers, skill shortages in factories, and a lack of cross-sector support. Yet, with ESG becoming a bigger focus for all, especially those in the built environment, which contributes around 40% of the UK's total carbon footprint, modular construction is likely to become a much larger part of our market with its proven environmental benefits. Joining me today to discuss the misconceptions, hurdles and opportunities of modular construction are a fantastic group of experts in the property development markets. So now I will hand this over to them, who will each spend around 2 minutes introducing themselves, and I'd like to start with Alex, please.
Thanks, Beth. Morning, everyone. So I am Alex Hurn, Managing Director of Sillence Hurn Building Consultancy. We are a progressive and modern sort of building consultancy practice specialising in project monitoring, project management and building surveying services, which incorporates party wall dilapidations and commercial property consultancy. As a business, we've been involved and are currently involved with a selection of modular schemes in both sort of project monitoring and contract administration capacity, and we're kind of seeing the continued conversations being had with our clients and colleagues around the usability and feasibility of modular methods of construction and modular construction. So I'm keen to learn more today with this with my fellow panelists.
Thanks very much for that, Alex. Luke.
I won't give you a rerun on the business synopsis. I think that would be slightly overkill. Good morning, everyone. I am Luke Masters. I'm the Business Development Manager at Sillence Hurn. So essentially, my interest and involvement in modular is I spend all my day speaking to architects, lenders, developers, and trying to essentially put projects together that work from a financial perspective, a delivery perspective, a material shortage perspective, and trying to essentially execute projects economically as well as viably. So in reality, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion for the pros and cons that are going to come out, and I think people might even have differing opinions, but it's certainly a conversation which is becoming far more frequent with lenders and with developers, and I think it's just about how we get the two parties to work together collaboratively to enable more modular delivery, I think, in reality. But yeah, I speak to people about modular all the time, and I can't wait to see what everybody else has had conversations around and what they think the solutions are.
Thanks for that, Luke. I'm also interested to hear what everyone has to say today. Peter.
Hi, morning everybody. My name is Peter Howarth. I work for Mint Property Finance. Thanks for Sillence Hurn for inviting me onto the panel today. Sillence Hurn are one of our monitoring surveyors on our panel. I've worked at Mint for about 4 years now, and Mint was set up in 2011 by Andrew Lazar. I've worked in the property finance sector for about 20 years now. I've seen a cross section of developers, from those who want to enter into development for the first time to your large corporate entities that might want to build large-scale developments in city centres, etc., etc. Mint have a development underwriter panel, a team of specialists here that underwrite the applicants' requests for lending as they come in. Yeah, that's it from me.
Thanks for that, Peter. We have two Davids here today, so I think it's only fair to go in alphabetical order. So David Ayre.
Good morning all. David Ayre from Ayre Chairman Gaunt Architects. We are a UK top 100 architecture practice. Started off probably over a decade ago by 3 of us, and we've grown to just over sort of 30 of us across 2 studios, one in Hampshire, one in central London. We're former winners of UK Young Architects of the Year. And our sort of work has generally sort of progressed from early years, domestic scale work to larger scale projects, including master plans, generally residential led, probably 2/3 of our work now, and a third being sort of education projects. In terms of kind of where we see and our experience with MMC, we've always kind of considered ourselves trying to sort of push innovation, and that's with the software we use and BIM, the way we model buildings and create buildings, but also in terms of the construction technology, and we've constantly been looking to kind of push the boundaries of what we can build. In recent years, we've just completed a volumetric student housing project in Winchester using steel frame volumetric construction, and also a 20-storey tower in Wandsworth, London, using a unitised cladding system. And we've got a number of other quite interesting schemes on the go at the moment, looking at sort of larger scale, I suppose, low-rise housing. So it's a 2-storey and looking at volumetric construction there, with clients that are looking at the idea of flying factories to deliver sort of projects like this, which I'm sure we'll talk about sort of later. But yeah, pleased to be involved.
Thanks very much for that. And last but definitely not least, David V.
Hi, I'm Strategic Development Director of Go Modular Technologies. We set up in 2018 in the UK. We come out of a heritage of skills of modular housing construction, manufacturing in Eastern Europe, and the business has started with its first factory in Southampton with a view to expanding more. We know that we're trying to change an existing traditional model of construction delivery, and we're excited to be part of it. In Latvia, about 80% of properties that are delivered are modular. So whilst it's new over here, it's not new elsewhere in the world. And that's probably something we'll no doubt talk about in due course. But look forward to the discussion that's going to ensue.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that. So now that we are all introduced, I just want to remind all of you viewing at home or in your office, you can submit your questions throughout today's discussion. You can do so in the chat box on the right of your screen on the control panel. I will be looking through those throughout the discussion today and asking them either throughout or in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the debate. So please do ask anything that you would like the panelists to answer today. I would like to kick off then. So my first question is all about the funding element of these types of schemes. So Peter, as a lender here, how accessible would you say funding is for the modular construction market, and what are the current challenges in this space?
Yeah, I think it's getting better. It's a progressive sector in terms of modular construction. I kind of liken it to, probably showing my age here, but you wind back 15 years, 20 years to timber frame, and timber frame was a, "Ooh, what's all this about" type of thing, and I'm just trying to shy away from it. I think to some degree that's similar to the modular construction that we're trying to deliver today. I think for me as a lender, you almost answer the question by the end mortgage provider. So can the mortgage provider provide a 20, 34 years mortgage? Can you get insurance on it? Can you get latent defect insurance? And to me, it's the longevity of the product, which might be a little bit untested at the moment. So, does a product look good today as it would do maybe in 10 or 15, 20 years time? And will there be a demand for that product? I think that's the test for me as a lender. And I think the challenges are around the cash flow and how that works with the contracts that developers sign up to with the manufacturers.
Thanks for that, Peter. David V, what's your opinion on the accessibility of funding in this space?
As Peter says, there is an increasing tranche of funders who are interested in funding, and there are some quite big names out there. Dealing with people like Close Brothers and others who are happy to be part of that market. We, of course, we don't arrange finance, so we leave that very much to our clients to arrange their development funding. But the point Peter's making in relation to the exit risk, the sales risk of properties is obviously important to us. That underwrite is effectively, from a mortgage lender perspective, always going to be done by whether the modules one produces are compliant with building regulations, whether they're warrantable in terms of the insurability of them. The longevity of properties is always going to be a challenge, in the sense that the current structure is we've got traditional buildings which are still standing, and therefore their longevity is defined by that reality. The question, I guess, is there a way one can demonstrate that the quality of what's being delivered through the modular process is sufficiently strong enough to meet that potential criteria? And that's something we look at consistently. But in terms of the quality of what we're doing, the majority where we're building, as we do, completed modules rather than panelized or other systems, is that they have to be transportable. So the strength and durability of these products, and I'll call them products to create this differentiation with traditional construction, the strength of these products is that they physically are built to a different quality, a different degree of strength, should we say, because they need to be transported. And so I would sort of throw it back, in a sense, on the traditional construction industry, which is, how does one demonstrate that a traditional built property has got the right quality marks? And it's straightforward, in a sense, to query, and understandable to query the risks of modular in that sense, but the reality is they are probably stronger than traditional built buildings because they need to be transported. And the materials are self-evident. They have to meet the appropriate criteria in terms of construction strengths and joint strengths and all of the other requirements from a structural perspective to secure the warranties and building regulations passes that underwrite that quality in objective terms. So yes, we of course are going to say, and they are as good as, if not better than, traditional build.
Thanks for
David,
that.
just to put in, David, I think you're quite correct in what you're saying. I think it's more like the public perception. You know, prefabs of yesteryear, post-war, this, that, and the other, it still kind of lingers around a bit, rightly or wrongly. And I think it's changed that public perception to create the demand for probably what you're undoubtedly delivering.
No, you're absolutely right, Peter. There is a huge perception. I mean, for those of us who remember sort of the Roland points, as you say, the post-war buildings, those any new systems, build systems that come in, have to be appreciated and understood, and therefore people need to be prepared to take the time to do that. Now, the members of the public out there who are buying houses should not be required to understand the technical capabilities of the buildings they're buying. They should be able to rely on the professionals involved in the processes to ensure that what they're getting is meeting the right quality of property that they're purchasing or renting. And it's incumbent on the industry, and I include ourselves within that, to ensure that people are properly educated and understand the issues. We have an open door policy for inspections for all funders to ensure that they get to understand it. There is an issue from funders as to those who are actually prepared to make the effort to understand the changes. And one of the issues that we deal with what I call high street lenders, or normal traditional high street bank lenders, is that they don't have the systems to enable them to understand and reevaluate their risk profiles of these of modular or in fact anything else, any sort of component systems. So that's one of the issues that we as an industry are facing, and one of the reasons why there is that slower adoption, because there is a lack of preparedness to understand the risks and reprofile the risks.
I've got a question from the audience, and I think it's worth just adding in now, just because we're talking about the funding aspect and before we move on to design and quality control. But this developer said, how do I get a development finance lender to support drawdown payments which aren't secured against something on site, but in a factory elsewhere that the bank doesn't own or have a legal charge over? The mortgageability point is moot if SME developers can't finance building them in the first place.
Do you want to step in, Peter, or shall I step in?
I think, well, first of all, I think it's a great question, a fantastic question, and that is, in a nutshell, the challenge for lenders and funders. It's understanding that cash flow. It's understanding, sure, Alex will step in a second to add to my commentary, is understanding the contract that the developer enters into with the likes of David V, and understanding the terms of the payments. Now, I guess a manufacturer might say to a developer, give me my whole £200,000 up front, I'll go away and make you a building for you. Whereas from a lender's point of view, hang on a minute, traditionally the value of my security would be materials on site and being fixed. So all things all these methods are built in a factory, and I get the efficiencies. It doesn't add a great deal to my security value until it's actually delivered to site. So it's a great question, and one we work with. It's a bit like timber frame to some degree. So in timber frame, there's usually 3 or 4 stage payments. So we'll work with the customer best we can. Might need a deposit, £20,000-30,000. We at Mint will look and be flexible on that. It's just those chunky payments whereby, hang on a minute, there's always a risk that the manufacturer, sure what happened to David V, but there's always a risk that the manufacturer might just go into liquidation or something, all of a sudden have released funds and I've got nothing to show for it. So you can have bonds, you can have warranties, vesting certificates and things like that. I think it depends then on the scale of the development. So, if you're looking at, say, a 200-unit development would be different to, say, just 1 or 2 houses, where it's a bit more flexible for a lender to help out with the cash flow. But bonds, warranties, testing certificates, things like that.
I don't know whether, Alex, you want to step in rather than me, but I'll happily address a number of those issues.
Yeah, no, I was just going to suggest, just to give a sort of from a project monitoring perspective, I mean, typically a lot of the lenders that we work for, obviously advance payments and off-site materials is always a big risk item, and that's that. And I think a lot of the conversation today is going to come back to sort of the education piece around modular and understanding how the cash flow of the project works and what can be done to mitigate the risk. And like Peter's addressed most of the things there are advance payment bonds available, where obviously you can guarantee any off-site materials advance payments. There's always the insurance and an ownership issue with sort of vesting certificates for any off-site materials, and then it's like, where if they're being stored, are they being stored securely? Are they is the premises insured? Has the bank or the lender got rights on the insurance, etc. So there are things there, but and to protect sort of build contracts for off-site construction. But again, it's back to education and who's picking up the liability of those, because obviously it does generate more liability for consultants and lenders.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of those comments. The reality of is that the traditional form of construction at the moment is that the lenders will lend against a site, and they will effectively pay when they see something's been produced. So when Alex goes down and inspects a site, sees X courses of bricks laid, kit on site, he can say, right, well, we can release this amount of payment, and it's released against a construction program. So it is drip fed through the project as bills are presented. The way in which that's funded in reality is that the main contractor has probably used credit to secure the goods from the material supplier. He's probably working with a bunch of subcontractors who he's paying on the drip as well. And the consequence is, in fact, that when that payment eventually comes in, which may be, say, 10 days after the presentation of that stage payment, that nobody has been paid to that date. And at any point, that house of cards can fall over. And where the main contractor has gone into a contractual position with a developer to deliver that site, as we all know in relation to the Carillion model, when eventually they come to book it and the subcontractors can't meet the total cost that's been put to the project, then the whole house of cards falls over. So the issue in relation to construction risk is not clearly perceived, should we say, or not clearly necessarily completely understood, or people are prepared to sort of let it fudge in relation to the way in which traditional is built at the moment. Now, as Peter and Alex have said, clearly funding and delivering modular products is a different proposition and needs a different thought process. But the same process of assessing the risk of the individual entity that's producing the products, quality of the products, the value of the materials, how those are managed and maintained as against stage payments are part of the process that we sit down and talk through with clients. But it is, without doubt, it is a change in the assessment and understanding of risk from funders. In fact, usually the underwrite on the site itself is the predominant underwrite in relation to most early parts of loans, and from a developer perspective. So that's the ultimate security that sits there, along with the performance of the developer in relation to that lender's activity prior to that. Most of our developer clients are experienced developers and have good relationship with their funders and have experience of understanding and presenting risk. Construction risk is part of that. Sales risk, project management risk, and all the other risks are also parts of the overall risk profile of any development. One of the greatest benefits of the modular systems that we produce is that our construction times are massively reduced. So the exposure to risk over time is significantly reduced, and that in of itself helps reduce the overall project risk of schemes. But that doesn't fit the overall delivery of speed isn't assessed in the traditional construction process, which requires actually quite an extended program of construction in order to be able to manage the risks. So change orders or project management instructions and rebuttals and changes take a significant time in a traditional construction environment, which actually extends the construction program and creates in of itself additional risk. But that's something Alex no doubt will talk to in more detail.
Thanks for that. I hope that answered the question for the developer. You all went into some great detail there, and I think, in short, vesting certificates was was probably the main answer there. But yeah, some really useful information there for our developer audience today. To move on to the design aspect, and David Ayre, I think this would be a perfect question for you. How does the design and quality control process differ on MMC projects when you're comparing them to the traditional build?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to focus on probably the design sort of section of that first, and essentially, kind of in a way, linked to the funding discussion we just had. Everything is more upfront, and one of the things that we've experienced over the last sort of 3 or 4 years is we've increasingly had clients that have come to us with a planning consent for probably a traditional build design for residential use, and then it's a case the question's being asked, can we look to do this within a modular solution? And you're trying to shoehorn a modular solution into a sort of unique and bespoke design. Very, very challenging to get that to work, and I think it ends up more often than not sort of compromise. So from a design point of view, I think the MMC conversation has to start right at the beginning of a project, right at that sort of RIBA work stage 0 and 1. To the basics, basically. Can you get lorry access with these? If it's volumetric, with these modules on the back of a lorry, can you actually access the site? Similar conversations if it's panelized. Also, in terms of crane access, is it a crane that's put in situ, or is it in terms of mobile? How does that work? That's absolutely sort of crucial. To sort of look at that early days, and all of this links into more investment and cost for developers up front. And we all know that pre-planning is where the sort of risk lies on projects, and post-planning, finance starts to unlock a little bit. What we've also seen from a design perspective is the need to bring consultants on board earlier than what would probably be the case with traditional methods. So not just structural, but you're looking at sort of services and integrating all of that within the design. And I think central to this whole MMC discussion is the use of BIM and having sort of fully coordinated designs to really bottom out issues before you start that fabrication process. And it goes back to then how we design, and with a number of clients where we've looked at volumetric and working directly with a factory, it's a bit of a mindset change for us as designers. And I suppose it really goes back to sort of product design, automotive design. It's designing, it's gaining feedback, it's testing, it's mock-ups, it's then interrogating that mock-up, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and going through that sort of process again. And that is a different sort of mindset to, we gain planning, we work out some of the detail later, we get on site, maybe the groundworks are sort of going up, and we're still trying to sort out the the services strategy. Doesn't work with modular or MMC. It's about sorting out that at an early stage. So very much an early design curve with this. So that's from a design perspective. Maybe I'll let someone else talk about the quality, Alex.
Yeah, but just before you do that, I think from a lender's perspective, it's very important that, like David Ayre mentioned there, you've got a developer on site, digging the footings, doing whatever they need to do. And it's very important that they work with the likes of the manufacturers to say, okay, what's the timeline for this? Have you seen the layout of the footprint of the site? They've got to work together and collaboratively with the developer. The developer just can't go ahead and do whatever he needs to do and hope that David V delivers, his materials to site, and all of a sudden they don't fit, because traditional construction methods are reasonably flexible, or quite flexible, I should say.
Yeah.
Whereas in my experience, modern methods of construction are a bit more inflexible once the materials come to site, because they're made for a specific measurement, in layman terms, from a lender's perspective.
Yeah, you're quite right, Peter. I mean, I think we work in an industry that there's continued sort of design change and brief change, isn't there? And David V is nodding his head, because that becomes increasingly sort of more expensive with an MMC sort of approach. And I think it's about drilling down, getting that brief sorted out and addressed early on in the process, so we're not having changes on site.
That must be the big advantage of your BIM, surely, because that ultimately negates a lot of that, because in theory you've gone through it and you've said, okay, right, we need to look at this. Are you happy with this? You want to change this? How are we going to amend this? And essentially, hopefully you've mitigated a lot of the questions by the time you've got to that sort of finished concept stage, before it goes over to David to start manufacturing and sticking it all together, for the want of a better word.
Absolutely, it's a coordination, no surprises, ideally. Yeah.
I think just if I can just come in there, just touching on just looking on Peter's point. I mean, that is crucial. Getting the coordination between the ground worker and the substructure and then the superstructure is critical. And I think a project we're working on actually with David V at the moment is that I think the engineer, the original substructure design was for piles before it went to a modular scheme, and being able to provide a modular scheme above ground allowed for the piles to be removed and to go to sort of more traditional foundations, which was a massive cost saving for the end client, I understand. So there are pros and cons, but yeah, understanding who is holding that design responsibility for the setting out and the coordination of that is critical. In respect to the quality control, and I mean, I'm sure David V will want to push this point a little bit further, but arguably the quality control is much better in a warehouse with no bad weather, with no security issues, with all of your known controlled labour, and there should be less contingency and less risk to defects occurring during the construction programme. And I think David Ayre touched on it, that another big benefit is you can essentially get a completed module, flat, apartment, whatever that looks like, for snagging and quality control, quality approval before it's even manufactured or moved to site. So you can kind of set the standard for the whole development within the warehouse before you've left the warehouse. Obviously, there's the other big points, like is around the sustainability side. Arguably, it's more sustainable. There's reduced waste. There's reduced on-site waste and material usage. So essentially, the quality, the quality control should essentially be better.
I have a question from the audience just on the design aspect. They've said, in my experience, final decisions on whether to use modular approaches, volumetric or otherwise, are made extremely late. How does one encourage sign-off from the outset and concept design to take full advantage of this type of design rather than being tacked on?
I'll just jump in with a sort of few points. We really only start talking to people once they've got a planning consent in place. because otherwise we're burning a huge amount of our design and thinking resource to consider projects which are, may or may not come through in the final form that's initially envisaged. But the point that David made in relation to working up to a more detailed design earlier in the curve than is in the traditional build sense is absolutely right. But the flip side of that is that the traditional build process, and it's an awful lot of, I suspect, what Alex gets involved in is change management during the course of construction, which is a massive issue for delay, risk, cost unclarity, etc. in the traditional industries. So one of the key changes that we're looking to institute in relation to modular is that we work that design thinking up to a much higher degree. We're looking to create our as-built drawings, for want of a better description, at the time when we're starting production, not at the end of the process. Now that requires a different quality on site. So, the point that was being made of making sure that the foundations are actually flat and square, that becomes more important. But we have a process of ensuring that we do those site inspections, and we work with our groundworks teams that are appointed by the contractors to ensure that those quality issues are met as part of the specification, not only of those contracts, so that the client knows what they're seeking to achieve, and we work closely with the client's design teams and architects to ensure that the objectives are met and that they meet the quality requirements to be the receiving site of modular. To date, we haven't had a single site that's been ready on the date that was targeted initially at the beginning of the development, not a single one. Now, that is one of the challenges that we're seeking to try and address, and we can address it internally. But as an industry, taking it from an industry perspective, that's one of the other risks that there is within the construction industry. It's why we're not as productive as a sector in the UK as other sectors. We've got an embedded lack of productivity in that sense. So we are trying to change. Absolutely, we're trying to change an awful lot of ways in which things are happening. But we're looking to do so and to take out risk from the construction process, not add to it. But any change needs to be reevaluated, which is a recalibration, a reassessment of risk. My suggestion would be that if the construction risks were reanalyzed objectively, you'd find that they're probably not being properly priced in at the moment in traditional build. But that's a separate issue. But certainly we look to get to a higher degree, because ultimately changing something on paper or a CAD screen is a lot less expensive than tearing things up and breaking them apart once they've already been built because a change has occurred or something doesn't work on site. That's a much more expensive process. We look to mitigate those risks early in the exercise. Sorry, I was going to say, in terms of internal quality, the points that Alex makes in terms of inspecting within the factories. I mean, we have a directly employed workforce. We managed, we paid furlough during COVID, whereas subcontractors have been left out in the limb without payment. It's been much more challenging for those self-employed individuals who work in that model. So we have a different management structure, a different management of people structure, and management of workforce structure than can occur within that traditional, contractor subcontractor model. But it enables us to be much more specific in terms of the quality with that consistent workforce.
I wanted to follow on from that, just with a comment from one of our viewers, rather than a question, but they've said that clients are regularly asking for a turnkey solution from modular providers rather than separating responsibility for site works and factory works, which I think leads quite nicely into my next question, all about skills. We've obviously seen a big shortage in material and skills in the traditional construction sector, and this is a growing issue. How is it currently impacting the growth of the modular space? Luke, did you want to chip in with an answer on that one?
I can do if my signal comes back, which it wasn't. There we go. I'm here. I'm back in the room. You're going to have to repeat that question only because you froze on my computer.
Oh, no problem. I was asking whether or not the material and skill shortages are currently impacting the growth of the modular space.
I think probably following on from what David literally just said is material shortages we know are abundant throughout the market, and you can't change that. If there's a material shortage on wood and you've got wood in the construction elements, there's a shortage. You can't get away from that. But I think one thing which is actually an advantage in modular in comparison to traditional construction is exactly what David just touched on, which is you've got a directly employed workforce. So if somebody's off sick, you know about it, they're off sick. You've got other people that you can pull into that. And essentially it's just far more manageable. It's not the normal main contractor subcontractor setup where the painter's supposed to turn up to paint 16 flats on Tuesday, but they don't turn up the Tuesday you want. They turn up 2 Tuesdays time, which just pushes out the whole program. Whereas a directly employed workforce, David's going to be on the phone going, if you want to keep your job, I suggest you come in. So I think it's far more controllable from a workforce perspective. From a material perspective, I think that possibly if you're looking at the SME developer, it might actually be more controllable, because if you're looking at a contractor or an SME developer, your purchasing power is very limited, because you're a small fish in a big pond. If you're going to a modular construction company, they are a company with lots of different clients that have a bigger purchasing power. So essentially they sit higher up the rank of, can I actually get these materials? Can I access them? Can I get delivery? But essentially they can shout louder and they should get a better response, would be my answer. So I think in this current climate, especially if you're looking at sort of SME developer level, I think there's certainly an advantage from a point of view of the workforce being essentially consistent and accountable for the work that they do, because they're directly employed. And then when you're coming through to the actual materials, I think that they've probably got better access to materials than a small contractor or an SME developer. I mean, David, I'm kind of doing your sales pitch for you, but I don't know if you want to add to that. I mean, I'm making an assumption based on logic, but you obviously see it.
Well, materials have been a real challenge. I mean, I think they announced in, I think, January, February this year, for the first time since 1946, that all sawn timber, structural timber, had been sold in the UK. I mean, that is a phenomenal statistic. There was no more wood to sell, even if you had the money. It had all been sold. We've seen a 64% increase since July last year in timber prices, sawn imported timber, 23% increase in timber prices just between June and July. So the pricing at the moment is extremely volatile. We've got, say, deep roots going back into Eastern Europe to source timber products directly from timber yards rather than going through UK-based suppliers. Our procurement teams are acquiring directly from a bigger range of suppliers, should we say, than traditional UK, because that's where our origin or the birth of the business came from. But it is a challenge. I mean, COVID, Brexit, everything is driver shortages. All of these issues are creating a very volatile supply chain at the moment. In relation to skills, yeah, I mean, there's something in the order of sort of 400,000 apprenticeships at the moment. About 10 years ago, there were about 100,000 apprenticeships. About 15% of that 100,000 were construction apprenticeships. Actually, the overall number of apprentices, even though the number of apprentices have quadrupled, has actually dropped for the construction sector. So the percentage now is even a fraction of the number of apprentices coming through. the lack of, and this has been partly a product of the, I'd suggest, of the traditional construction and using subcontractors to create the supply chain, is that it's much more challenging for small subcontractors to start and implement, a training program which they will take somebody through from a starter to a fully qualified site worker. We can structure that with an employment, with direct employment. We can put in place training regimes. We can put in place all of that in order to create the skills necessary for the business. And we're working closely with educational establishments to do that. So that is something we're very, very keen on. But breaking the construction program down in a very systemized way enables us to manage the application of those skills in a much more effective way than it is possible on site, where contractors are spread over a larger working area.
Peter,
I think
oh,
it's okay, Beth, go ahead.
I'd like to just move on to some of the risks when it comes to contracts, and I think this might be a good one for Peter when we're looking at the risks lenders should be watching out for when it comes to modular manufacturing contracts and also warranties cover. What do you have to add on that element, Peter?
Well, I think collateral warranties have always been a thorny piece of paper or document to put in place. You've got the lender who wants everything on his side, and you've got the manufacturer who wants to, say, dumb down the wording and reduce the risk on their side. So some lenders, previous role, wouldn't change their collateral warranty whatsoever. So here's our collateral warranty. Our lawyers have put it together. Go away and get the manufacturer or whoever's got design responsibilities to sign up to the collateral warranty. It is a challenge, but I kind of think of on the basis that it's good to have a kick-off meeting sometimes. So get as many parties as you can around the table, because what's the goal? What we're trying to achieve? Yeah, we all want to win-win. But if we all work together and take some of the risk or not some of the risk, then you can, achieve the end goal. Some of the bonds, for example. So if I wanted a bond from a company, I probably want it backed. So I'd want a high street bank or whatever to guarantee the bond, which means that if the manufacturer goes into liquidation, I've got that sum of money coming back to me. It is an issue. And it's a hurdle that's not insurmountable, but it is a hurdle. Was that answer the question?
What would you add on the side of project monitors? What they should be looking out for when it comes to these contracts and cover?
Yeah, sure. I think it's sorry, is that for me or somebody else?
To Alex.
Right.
He has basically done my job for me there. He's highlighted all the main construction risks. I mean, the only other thing I think which Peter touched on at the start is that the sales strategy and understanding what lenders are going to accept mortgages on these on properties at the end. I think there are a selection of sort of 10-year structural warranties now, or you can get on modular products, and I think David they are registered with Build Zone, I think, are a provider of a 10-year warranty. So you can get the 10-year warranty, but yeah, I mean the biggest risk on the back end is understanding how much it shrinks the market for sales, I suppose.
Moving on to the sustainable aspects, I actually had a comment from someone who said that their experience with modulars is that they've added renewable products such as inline solar roofing, and this has added a provable income revenue, which has been provable to the lender. So when they do the CGI walkthrough, the lenders can early on see the benefits of that, and normally the properties are pre-sold. So I wanted to ask a bit about sustainable housing. It's increasingly becoming a point of focus in the built environment. So how are modular builds contributing to this drive? David Ayre, do you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I'll kick off and start. I think, ultimately, we're moving to something which is in situ, or made sort of in situ in a traditional sense. Generally, if it's in the UK, the wet, the damp, the wind, where we're trying as architects to now specify things that are down to what was probably a tolerance of 2 inches or something, to down to like the millimeter, and we're never going to manage that now unless we sort of move to I suppose treating our sort of construction in more of a product sort of way. And the big push that we're doing from an environmental sort of point of view is really focusing on a fabric first approach, and air tightness is crucial to that. And within a factory environment, there's no excuses here. You can get this detailed nicely, all the junctions are nice and sort of airtight, and that's dealing with sort of the basics. And also, as probably most of the audience know, be it sort of a timber frame traditionally, but steel sort of modules as well, you can really sort of work on the thermal performance of those modules before you start. So I think that's the sort of the energy sort of side. But I think what fascinates me now is actually about the the factory system itself, and improving the sort of the module through iteration, starting to sort of minimize that sort of wastage. So are you working to I'm sure David will talk about this, but minimizing sort of the amount of offcuts, minimizing the amount that's sort of thrown away. How much of it is then recycled back into the system? And I'm sure, if not already, factories are going to be looking at how they can become zero carbon themselves. Is there any offcuts that can then actually be used to heat the the factory or sort of places around? So that's where I see things sort of going. Certainly, if we touch on the last sort of conversation about material shortages, we've got to get into that mindset now as society about minimizing waste, being leaner with the way we build, no longer having a design that's gained planning, but actually, to achieve that design, we end up with a 350 thick concrete slab, just because that's we haven't thought about that early enough. It's about trying to be really, really lean with materials, making those materials work really, really hard. That's where I think sort of MMC discussion really starts to sort of come forward.
We have a question from the audience saying, why aren't lenders putting more of an emphasis on energy efficiency? All of our units achieve an A-rated energy performance certificate, which can't be said for a lot of new build properties today. Peter, maybe that's something which you would like to answer in terms of your kind of focus on energy efficiency properties.
Yeah, I think as time moves on, we're thinking about being a bit more greener and energy efficient going forward. I think in the mortgage market now, I'm not going to quote the lender, the mortgage provider, but I've definitely seen them offering cheaper lending rates for those houses that are more energy efficient. So that's a way of mortgage providers trying to drive up standards and be a bit greener. We've seen EPCs in the past and this, that and the other, so they've gained traction now, especially if you want to rent a property out, you've got to have a required EPC, energy performance certificate. And I think that's followed on with mortgage providers, certainly on the high street, saying, well, if you've got an A or a B energy performance certificate, then you can have this rate. Whereas Pete, yours is a Z energy performance certificate, and we don't even want you anymore, so type of thing. So I think collectively, it's that kind of drive for efficiencies coming from the mortgage market, really, and obviously then the lender's perception of their own social responsibilities.
You're right. I think it's very much from the top down, and then it will filter more into the specialist space, especially in the development market. So I think we've definitely reported on a lot of green mortgage products in the last 6 months or so. So it's definitely becoming more of a theme, but I think there still needs to be, there's a long way to go there. We haven't got through all of the questions we had on our agenda, but the questions from the audience are flooding in. So I'd like to go through some of those if possible, just in our last 5 minutes. We have a question from a lender, a development lender, saying, if a pod manufacturer goes bust, how difficult is it to then replace them with another manufacturer? If it is a contractor for a traditional build, then there are obviously lots of other firms which could step in. Who would like to take up that question?
Well, I think firstly it depends on what you've got in place. I mean, if you've got vesting certs in place and you own the product and you can pick that product up from the warehouse and it's not in the liquidator's hands, then it should be. I'm sure you could find another modular firm to pick that up. Obviously, it's going to cause you a lot of issues with warranties. Who's taking design responsibility? And you're going to probably pay addition. You're going to double up on payments there for renewing those warranties or someone to take the design liability. But it really does come down to who's in ownership of the goods and how they've gone into administration and who's owning that modular unit.
I think just to add to that, I think you sort of track into what you call performance bond. So if your contract's for £200,000, then you want a performance bond for £200,000 plus £30,000-40,000 maybe to allow that flexibility of trying to find another provider. That's similar to traditional methods of construction, really. Performance bond for the contract plus a bit extra allows you that flexibility in time.
I think that.
Sorry.
I was just going to jump in on that as well. I mean, there are a couple of things I just wanted to say. First of all, what Alex says is absolutely correct. I mean, obviously, traditional builders do go bust during the middle of construction projects. This thing is not unknown. So these things do occur, whatever the scenario is. And this goes back to, what's the risk performance that lenders are looking to secure in relation to the delivery of any construction program. And the point Peter was making about warranties and bonds and everything else in relation to any form of construction project, that's something that needs to be considered in relation to the project. We vest everything, so what we have in the factory is all owned by the people who have paid us to deliver. So it's very, very straightforward from our perspective. I think I won't go back over the previous conversations that have been had in relation to some of the other issues, but certainly I'll part that and get on to your next question, Beth, otherwise I'll go on for one.
I do actually have a question for you, David. So from the audience, they've asked you directly, if construction risk is reduced, then should developers or banks be expecting lower profit returns for appraisals, or does the potential risk associated with public perception negate that?
We don't supply occupiers with products, we supply developers. So our market is our developers. What margins they make on their development is entirely up to them. We supply at a price which is designed to make us attractive to our customers. But we're not going to start trying to dictate what profit developers should make, hopefully as much as they can.
And I think
people like, sorry, Peter.
I was just going to say, just adding to that, I think it's quite important for any developer to, perhaps go speak to a valuer. Just going to have to go speak to a valuer. I'm thinking of building this way. I'm going to use David V's company. Can you go down and see the quality of his products that he's building? And you get a valuation that is a bit more workable, amenable, fit for purpose, rather than say, valuer goes to site, looks around the market, gets his comparables, and then might be sat there thinking, how do I value this? Because I'm not seeing the actual quality of the product that's going to be delivered. So I think from a lender's point of view, I'd certainly ask my valuer, can you get down to whatever manufacturing company? Just go down there for half an hour, please. And similarly from the monitoring survey side, I'd say to Luke or Alex, guys, this is the bill, can you go to this manufacturing company and just have a look around and see what the quality is?
I mean, just on that point of quality, I mean, we create the first module we produce is our quality benchmark, which is signed off and assessed by the entire developer team. So we set that up as an absolute level of practical delivery of quality for each scheme that we get involved in. So the point Peter makes in relation to a valuer assessing what the final product's going to look like, you know, if he goes on site and a traditional build, he won't know what the final quality of the product looks like, or the property looks like, until that final skim of plaster's gone on and the decorators are in. We can show that effectively within 3 weeks of the contract starting. So we're totally changing the analysis of what quality means in terms of construction, because we effectively determine that at the outset of any project.
We have tons more questions, and I will pass them on to our panel at the end of this session so that they can answer them over email, and I will include that in our write-up next week, just for anyone who hasn't got an answer. I did want to, I know we're at 12, but I did want David Ayre just to talk about the education of this sector, and we actually had a little conversation just before we went live, and I thought it was really useful for him to talk about that, and also if there's anyone in this space who maybe wants to partner with you in terms of, you know, educating at school level. So David, do you want to just talk about a bit of what you're doing to try and get more people into the sector?
Yeah, thank you for extending the session on, because we can't go through a whole sort of MMC discussion without talking about Mark Farmer and his you know, Modernise or Die paper from 5 years ago. So Mark Farmer, for those that don't know, he's the sort of the government, I suppose, champion on MMC, and he was talking about you know, materials and skills shortages, you know, 5 years ago, and only I think last week did an article again, sort of linking to, you know, this growing crisis in sort of labour and sort of citing even things like shortages of chicken at Nando's and HGV drivers and that sort of thing. The point I want to make with all of this is that this is only going one way. We've got an aging sort of construction sort of population in terms of sort of workforce, and you know, I think combined with tradition with material shortages, you know, without doubt, I think the traditional form of construction is probably only going to go one way in terms of costs. There may be a little bit of a dip again, but I think generally it's going one way. For me, I think this is a real opportunity now, and we've been talking about it for years and years, but a real opportunity now to embrace MMC as a way of starting to make you know, projects viable. And you know, I think Barrett's have just announced last week that they want to ramp up MMC by 30% by 2025. So I think slowly, you know, the big players are starting to get their head around things. It comes back to, do we really want to start from a government side, you know, pushing, you know, from a school sort of age, you know, mass training in traditional sort of techniques, or do we want to take this as an opportunity to inspire a generation of kids coming through from different backgrounds and much more bigger sort of diversity, to look at these exciting kind of new roles within construction? And it's not all about getting, you know, wet and cold and damp and muddy in you know, yes, that would probably still happen, but actually there's new sort of techniques. It's a lot more sort of in terms of product design and that sort of process of delivery, you know, working with CNC machines and all this sort of thing. And I think this is where, you know, the apprenticeship side, you know, I don't think we've really, as a nation, sort of even scratched the surface for this now. It's about inspiring these kids that these new jobs are out there. It's not about picking these traditional sort of roles of, you know, postman, milkman, accountant, you know, architect. No, there's all these new exciting sort of jobs coming through, and that's it's got to be, I think, sort of government led to really push that. Productivity, you know, in construction just hasn't kicked on. There's various sort of data there that, you know, since 1994, it's pretty much stayed flat. loads of other industries have sort of gone up through. Productivity isn't increasing, so we've got to start to address this. And you know, I think MMC is a solution to all of that.
Thanks very much for that. Apologies, I think my audio went down a little bit when I was asking that question. I just wanted to check you can all hear me okay now. Thank you very much. We are 5 minutes past 12, so I definitely need to bring the event to a close. I just want to thank you, Sillence Hurn, for partnering with us on this, and thank you to our fantastic expert panel for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. And I also want to thank you, our audience, for joining us. We will be publishing the roundtable in full next week on DFT for those that weren't able to make today's live event. And if you enjoyed this one, please do check out our virtual roundtable calendar for this year on DFT and B&C. We are holding events every week until the end of the year. And also, for more insight and news on the specialist finance sector, you can check out the latest issue of the print Bridging and Commercial magazine on our websites. In the meantime, have a fantastic afternoon, rest of your week, and we hope to see more of you in person soon. Thank you so much.